Welcome to the Post Shift Podcast, your raw look at the hospitality industry, brought to you by SHC. What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. This last week, I did a little Google form. It was super casual. I just wanted to do a Google form of the state of business across Canada. Obviously, I got a lot of responses from Victoria, Vancouver. That's my market. But I do get a good spattering of everything. Now, I asked some pretty easy questions, so I'm going to run you through it. I'm not sure if I'm going to publish it because it's a bit messy. I'm not going to publish the results on this. I'm just going to sort of peruse over it during this podcast, this episode. So I asked what city market you're in. We got a good spattering, predominantly Victoria, 39% from Victoria, 13.9% from Vancouver. The rest across everywhere. Other areas of Vancouver Island, plus Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, a few places. I would like to go a little bit deeper, but you know what? I got almost 100 responses, so I think I'm getting a good little cross-section of how the market's reacting. And I looked at each individual response just to see if, Toronto's doing good. I'm not going to group them into everywhere else, but everybody sort of had the same sort of thing. 71.6% of respondents were from the restaurant and bar industry. Second to that is the quick service restaurants, so your QSRs. And third after that was liquor distribution and representation, and then distilleries, wineries, and breweries, because I wanted to get a good cross-section of whether or not it's just restaurants and bars on premise that are hurting, or is it actually retail? Is it the suppliers and distributors and the producers as well? So it was a good little mix. From 1 to 10, how has 2024 been so far? The biggest result, 20.5%, said a 6 out of 10. Not too bad. Outside of that, there was a fair few up in the 7, 8, 9s, not too many. And the big spattering came from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was the biggest cross-section. They had upwards of 45% of the sub 5 out of 10 for how their 2024 has been, how their summer's been. Question, what was the biggest external factor affecting your business? 65.2% said guest traffic and spending habits. 13.5 said generational drinking changes, which has been a big talk. A lot of non-alcoholic cocktails and non-alcoholic ingredients, drinks have actually grown exponentially in a lot of markets. Tourism's down. Going to get to that. I'm gonna read out all the results, and I'm going to sort of give you my critique across the board on how I feel the industry is going right now for 2024 and through summer. What are the biggest external factors affecting your business? What are the biggest internal factors? Not external, we just did external. Internal factors affecting your business. 70.1% of respondents said rising operating costs, ingredient costs, so on and so forth. That could be grouped into, probably bump up to about 75 because I had a lot of all of the above. Second one, rising rents. Second one, staffing. Big one for that one. And then third, rising rents and leases, which in Victoria, we've had a number of bars and restaurants in this year, closed down due to rent increases and landlord things. And so not just restaurants, a whole brewery shut down. A big legacy brewery in Victoria called Vancouver Island Brewing actually shut down because of the 35% rent increase on their facility. Their facility was huge, so 35% is a massive uptick. Where do you stand with last year's sales? So 37.1% said that they were at 0 to 20% down on last year. That's a big chunk, being 20% down. 25.8% was said they were 0 plus 20% up on last year, but they have said to me that they are up, but the cost of goods has increased by about 5 to 10%, and then they've increased their prices. So the 0 to 20% increase in their top line revenue is kind of a ghost. It's kind of a ghost because it's basically trying to offset the increased costs as well as menu price increases. 13.5 said equal last year, not too bad, and 12.4 said 20 to 35% down on last year, and 10.1% said 20 to 35% up. Now, the big verbiage I got from everybody when they said, yes, we're up on last year, was that increase in menu price. but it's not offsetting the increase in the cost of goods and staffing and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to bring up another little sheet I have here. Where is this? So in the last 12 months, operating costs in restaurants, I'm looking at a couple of articles here, have increased. Sorry, wait a second. Costs for these items remained among the top concerns for restaurateurs. Food prices in particular have surged, with the restaurant reporting that menu inflation has outpaced consumer spending growth, which could decline by 1.8%. What does that mean? It means that increase in menu price has not been matched with consumer spending. So we're increasing our menu prices, but the consumer spending is not coming up at the same time, which is really, really tough. 62% of operators either operating at a loss or barely breaking even, and up to 53% in mid-2023, so this is last year, I'm talking about 2024. Despite these challenges, the food service industry is expected to grow, with overall sales projected to increase by 4.9%. So again, 4.9% increase in growth doesn't necessarily mean 4.9% increase in the bottom line. 4.9% increase on that top line revenue is great, but if your costs have increased by 5 to 10%, not so great. So let's go back to my little spreadsheet here. So before I delve into the questions, I'm just going to give you a couple of quotes from people who have said what are their fears and aspirations for the next 6 to 12 months. I'm not going to lie, there's some gut-wrenching comments in this one. Like, as an operator, as a consultant, as a hospitality professional, as someone who loves this industry so much, there is a lot of comments in this thing that is like, pulls your heartstrings. First one, ability to continue operating. Cost keeps rising. When our lease ends and rent skyrockets after we finally caught up, we'll be forced to close. Basically spending 5 years getting out of debt to decide to close or take steps backwards. Post-pandemic, there was a pent-up demand for socializing that seemed to balance out the general rapid increase in the cost of production, or operation, sorry. That demand has steadily decreased over the last 18 months, but the operational costs have continued to increase. With the looming recession, guests are more spend conscious than ever before, while simultaneously underestimating the cost of goods and so in perceived value. In this environment, many restaurants are choosing to not pass on the cost of guests to remain competitive, which is unsustainable long term. Survive the winter without taking on debt. Oof. I expect to close my business by year end and file personal bankruptcy. Growth by way of partnerships with other producers to decrease overlapping costs. I believe that one was from a distillery. Winter will be tough. The cost of eating, drinking out has jumped massively over the last 18 months, so people are more inclined to stay home or stick with established products, venues, rather than trying something new. The honeymoon period of new restaurants is shrinking. Fear, economy decreases. Fear that the continued decline of business keeps going until it's too late. Hope, some future events that we will close. Rising costs and no government support. Good holiday season, very quiet winter, January to March, the first quarter of the year, which is always really tough for a lot of people. Get going on this one. The general consensus is that costs are going up, staffing costs are going up. Staffing's a big issue, as it always has been in this industry. And the cost of the menu increases aren't matching the cost of the thing. And as we said, consumer spending, menu pricing is going up, consumer spending has actually declined. Not a good market to be in right now. So let's just go over a couple of things here. The one thing I want to say, there was a lot of 6, 7, 8s, and 9s in saying how their year was going, but then 2 questions later said they were 20% behind. So I think there's a little disconnect on like how good your year's going. Like, you may be having bums in the seats and maybe making the money, your per head spend might be down. Again, costs going up, spending coming down. So there's a disconnect between how you actually feel and what is business savvy, if that makes sense. So the biggest external factor affecting business, guest traffic and spending habits. We've talked about that. Consumer spending is down over menu crisis. You're getting less people through the door, spending less money. It's just the way that the guest traffic is going right now. We are in a massive inflation borderline recession. We have two, like at least here on the West Coast, we have the BC provincial government election coming up fairly shortly, which always puts a bit of a squeeze on people. And then we have the American, the US federal election coming up fairly shortly, which does affect us tourism-wise. So biggest external factor, the guest traffic and spending habits. The second one, generational drinking habits. This has changed drastically. I was talking to someone on LinkedIn the other day about the astronomical increase in the non-alcoholic drinking market. And he was like, well, maybe that'll fill the gap of the people who aren't drinking and going out. I'm like, we're seeing a 10 to 20% increase in non-alcoholic drinking, which is usually at a lower price point, isn't filling the gap of how much that stuff costs and filling the gap of our clients that are drinking. The generation of drinking changes is definitely changing. I just did an event recently, and this hard seltzer lineup for the tents was massive in comparison to ours. Now, fair enough, we were at a whiskey bar, a whiskey brand bar, but like it's still very, very, very different. The Gen Z market, the 1997, born 1997 onwards, are definitely changing their drinking habits, and it is affecting on-premise. And I'll say this why. Why does this affect on-premise? Because when you're serving drinking guests, you have a big selection of stuff. You have cocktails that are created, that's the thing. When you're serving non-alcoholic guests, you can have a really great non-alcoholic cocktail menu. I think we do at Clive's. I think a lot of bars and restaurants in Victoria do. But you can't stock a gazillion non-alcoholic things. So a lot of people are choosing to drink at home because they can have the selection they want at home to appeal to their non-drinking or sober curious or zebra drinking, whichever you want to do. Zebra drinking is making articles. So like zebra drinking means that you like have a night where you drink, have a night you don't drink, or even during the night you go one alcoholic drink to one non-alcoholic drink and you bounce like that. So generational drinking changes is definitely affecting the market. The big one for us anyway in Victoria is tourism. Now I've talked about this a little bit and I don't know what the solution is, to be honest with you. I think the cruise ship market is very volatile right now. It has been for the last 2 years. We definitely saw a big shift last year in the tourism ship market, and I'm not sure. My hypothesis, and it's just a pure hypothesis, is that cruise ships have started marketing towards middle to lower middle class clientele to travel on cruise ships with minimal disposable income. And it might be a multi-stop, so they're spreading them minimal disposable income on. So we'll see massive streets, like our streets are packed with people, but you see restaurants that are very, very popular, usually with tourists and especially cruise ship people, being very, very quiet. So this is my hypothesis, like there's just not enough money in the system to have these tourists who come and we pay a ton of taxes and get them in, to get them into our city, to actually spend the money through to us. Hot food and beverage in the tourism ecosystem is very rarely seen as a actual piece of the puzzle. So tourism DMOs, destination marketing organizations or destination management organizations, tend to focus on hotels, transportation, and theme rides, attractions. Thank you. I just thank myself. Attractions. That's usually the big three things that they focus on. Food and beverage is usually like an outer layer of the tourism ecosystem. And I think with that in mind, they're reporting how many cruise ships we have, how many cruise ship people we have, but we're not seeing that money transfer and that money get spent in our establishments. So I think it's a big responsibility for the DMOs to start really sort of looking into that and figuring out how we can make this work. Because while they may make a mention of food and beverages, I don't think it's fully integrated into the ecosystem to really make a massive difference. So that's the external factors. So let's look at internal factors. Internal factors, 70% rising operating costs. This is really tough. This is based around companies. I think the pandemic allowed a little bit of elasticity into how much we were willing to spend based on the supply chain. And the supply chain was pushed because of the pandemic to allow these prices to creep up. And now companies aren't letting that elastic come back. They tend to just keep pulling, they just keep going, okay, well, like this is the way it is the way it's been since the pandemic. And it's not sprung back and fixed itself. And I think that's a little bit of I don't want to say corporate greed, but I think corporations are looking at the profits they made during the pandemic and they want to keep that way. Take, for instance, airlines. I'm going to use this as an example because this is a perfect example. How many times did you have canceled flights and bad airline experiences before the pandemic? And then during the pandemic and just post-pandemic, that shoulder, we got used to canceled flights, bad service, things missing out connections, late flights, all these things, because the pandemic pulled that elastic. And now it's sort of like the mainstream. It's the everyday. We are missing flights. Flights are being canceled. Flights are being delayed. So this elasticity is like, what can the consumer take? And it's going to spring back. It has to spring back. It has to be looked at. And I know in Canada right now, big supermarket chains are being looked at. And I think the next federal election, there's going to be a bit of a shakeup when it comes to it, because groceries are just getting exorbitantly expensive. And believe it or not, we don't pay much less in the restaurant world for the stuff that we serve. And we've got to incur all the fees that come along with that. Cooking it, storing it, serving it, plateware, everything that comes along with it. So rising costs, I think they have to spring back. It's just the nature of economics. They've pulled the elastic to see how far as a consumer we can take it. And I don't think it can keep going that way. So second up was staffing. I've talked about staffing a ton. I did 2 episodes the last 2 weeks on staffing. I think the next generation is definitely looking for it. So as venues, we need to apply some of these mentalities that the Gen Z demographic have to the way we run our operations. We're not going to push our agenda onto this generation. We need to find a middle ground and find a piece mark. So if it is a 4-day week, then you have to make it a 4-day week. If it's stability benefits training, figure out how to make it work, because we can't keep complaining about staffing. Yes, it is part of rising costs, but if you're turning over staff, that costs money, and that money is so intangible in our industry. It needs to be looked at way more. So watch some of my episodes on staffing. I'm not going to go over it again. Like last week's episode was on how to hire the right team of the year. One before was how to minimize turnover. Go listen to those episodes. And the third one, rising rents and leases. This one's tough. Coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of landlords were trigger shy on raising rents because they didn't want to be demonized. Okay, they have expenses too. Some of the rent hikes I think are a little excessive. But that being said, municipalities are increasing property taxes and extra taxes on top of that to fund things inside the city. So where's that money coming from? It can't come from the landlord's pocket. The whole point, the landlord owns property to rent it to make a profit. Now, I'm not gonna comment on amount of profit that people should be making from property, but if you look at it as a business, you're looking at making 15-20% profit. Gross profit should be 10 to 15, 20%, 25% profit. That's what commercial real estate is. That's just the way it is. So if they have incurred rising costs, like every other place, they need to make the money from somewhere. So rising rent and leases, I think the only piece of advice I can give to restaurateurs and landlords, have a frank discussion 6 months before the lease is up. Like set a meeting, even 12 months before the lease is up. Set a meeting, start having conversations and talking about your leases. The thing is that a lot of times you're hearing these things, oh, the landlord just dropped it on us. Like meetings. Find a middle ground, because again, landlords are seeing empty spaces. Empty spaces can be a tax write-off. There's a whole bunch of tax legalities around it too. So leases and rents are always going to be a big shake-up for everybody. So let's have a look at that. Where do you stand over last year's sales? 0 to 20%, that's not great. You want to see at least 5 to 10% growth in your restaurant every year, just based on menu increases, prices, so on and so forth. 0 to 20%, that's a big chunk to be down. That's something that if you got rising costs and down revenue, you'd figure out a way to do it. So you're cutting hours to save labor. You're doing everything in your power to do it. Equal to last year, you're treading water. You're not doing too bad. Up 25.8%. But again, as I said, if your costs have gone up 10%, but you've got 20% increase, you're really not making much more money. like it's just getting chewed up on both ends. Like, so it is a bit of a worry. What I can say with this one is, look, grab my break-even calculator and take 12 months worth of P&Ls where you were making profit, and type it into your own spreadsheet so you can get an average. Punch that average into the break-even calculator, and that will give you a number that what you have to hit to break even every month. And if you know that, then you can go, okay, well, I need to have this many bodies in. Because once you get your break-even calculator for the month, you know how many bodies you need to have for service, for per head spend. You should know which per head spend is, all these sort of things. And you should be able to like manage to figure out exactly what you need to do to budget up to cut some costs, okay? I know that was a heavy one, guys. I really hope that you got some value out of that. If you did, please like, subscribe, share, do whatever you want to do. Comment. You can comment through Spotify now. But give me a comment down below if you want to chat more. You can always DM me. I'm always open, very transparent to having a chat. But thanks as always, guys. Have a good week. Bye.
Thanks for listening, Pose Shifters. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I really enjoy sitting down with friends and peers and just chatting about the industry and getting down to the nuts and bolts of what's really going on out there. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, everything on all the platforms. Just hit it up and I'll do my best to answer any queries or questions you have. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.